I try to imagine what made me cross the sea. I have to be crazy to do this.
Can you imagine drifting night, day, without seeing any sight of any land or anything?
It's clear that it's a lawless space, because it's just, you don't see people there, so it's like anything can happen.
Either way, you will die. So we said, at least we will die doing something that we choose. Let us die trying, instead of waiting for nothing.
Maybe you can see a big ship passing by. This is the only thing, and you maybe try to wave and no one is helping you.
Even on this crowded planet, there are places on Earth where one could argue that even the notion of humanity is all but non-existent, where the human element is so scarce and the environment so harsh, you might as well be in the void of space. This is a journey into one of those places, and it's a story about the people who end up there, either because they feel they have no other choice, or because they feel compelled to bring some humanity to this place. Today we go with photographer and videographer Alexia Webster into international waters in the heart of the Mediterranean Sea. She takes us on a journey aboard the Ocean Viking, a ship chartered by the humanitarian group SOS Mediterranee in partnership with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, the IFRC. The ship has a singular mission of saving people who find themselves lost in international waters between Europe and North Africa, where every year thousands of people lose their lives as they try to find safety and a better life in Europe. With the help of audio clips from her interviews, she'll introduce us to people who've made the journey on little more than a rubber dinghy, and we'll hear from crew members of the Ocean Viking, people who spend their lives at sea trying to prevent even more lives from being lost. Alexia Webster, welcome. Thank you for coming here and taking us on this journey today. You've done so many photo and video assignments in very difficult conditions and situations. What made this particular assignment so different?
I think this assignment was actually unlike anything I've done in my career. Being at sea is a completely unique environment. Before this, I'd never been at sea for longer than a few hours, actually. So I had no idea what it was going to be like to live in like a confined, small ship in very close quarters with a crew of 30 members. And before the rescue started, we got intensive training on board in terms of safety, because the ship can be a very dangerous place to work in. And we also had training on ethical issues and emergency medical procedures. And it was during the COVID pandemic, so we had to go through a period of quarantine and wear masks and protective clothing. And with all this happening on this big, loud steel vessel, sleeping in a tiny bunk bed in a small cabin, I started to have this feeling from very early on, like we were astronauts actually, preparing for a space mission of some kind, or a mission to a completely different realm. And I remember lying in my little bunk bed and feeling the ship dance over the waves and listening to that roar of the engine, and realizing that we're in a world that we could not survive in for more than a few hours. We were totally dependent on this giant metal machine we were in. And that feeling what really got me contemplating the danger that people are facing at sea, and that absolute fear and the loneliness they must feel being lost, floating in this massive desert of the sea on a tiny, unseaworthy boat. Just how terrifyingly life-threatening this be.
Can you imagine drifting night, day, without seeing any sight of any land or anything, or just maybe you can see a big ship passing by. This is the only thing, and you maybe try to wave and no one is helping you, and you still don't know where you are and how far is the land from you.
So this is Louisa. She's a search and rescue coordinator on the Ocean Viking.
Here we have a certainty. All the time we know where we are. But if you don't, I really can't even understand the fear that can be felt. Though maybe you're starved, or it's so hot that you are burning under the sun. There is no water. What do? You just hope that someone is finding you.
We're going to hear next from Dragos. He's a former journalist of 14 years who gave up his career to become part of the search and rescue team for SOS Mediterranee.
It's just another world at sea, in the international waters close to other countries, because it's just, you don't see people there, so it's like anything can happen, and there is no like police. Like it's a very different thing what's happening in a city or even in the countryside compared to what's happening there, when you are miles and miles and you don't encounter anybody.
One of the IFRC care team leaders is a man named Richard Fredin, who is a sailor in the French Navy, and he tells us more of how sailors understand being at sea.
Being at sea puts you at risk. I would say, because you are not on shore, your life is also a bit suspended, you know, but also because you're between life and death. If you want to be safe, don't be at sea. Huh? I mean, I think it's Aristotle who had a very known saying that you've got three types of men: the living man, the dead man, and the one who are at sea.
So what did it feel like to hear these impressions of being at sea as you yourself headed out into that sea?
Yeah, I definitely felt a sense of trepidation and uncertainty of what we would encounter out there. I also understood too from the emergency training that we had done and from those stories of the crew had told me about their past missions that tragedies can happen, mass tragedies, and out there on the open sea things are much more precarious. So there's a lot of unknowns for me and what was to come.
And once the searching actually begins, what is that process like? What does the searching process look like?
So the search happens in multiple different ways simultaneously, because it's very hard, of course, to find a tiny rubber dinghy or a little fishing boat in the middle of the sea. Most of these boats have no navigational abilities at all, and definitely don't have any way of sending distress signals like a regular boat has on board. On the Ocean Viking, though, the search happens firstly with radar that scans for boats. Then there's a few NGOs that have small planes that search the seas from above looking for shipwrecked people. But also the crew stand on deck night and day, searching and scanning the vast horizon with binoculars for this tiny speck of a boat. And it's difficult and exhausting work. And then there's the fourth way, which is that there's an organization called Alarm Phone that alerts the Coast Guards and the rescue ships of any distress signals that people have managed to send on their phones to family members, for example, with a text message or WhatsApp.
But I guess even with all that, sometimes those systems, they fall short, right? Your next audio segment is also from Louisa, the rescue coordinator, and she talks about what happens when all these systems, which she kind of refers to as her crystal ball, just simply aren't enough.
In April, well, my crystal ball didn't really work very well. We were just super late because we were in the opposite part of the area, and when we arrived to the place, there was just the shipwreck with 130 people dead. It was horrible. Horrible. Also, the weather was horrible. I can't imagine how was in that boat that night.
Was anybody alive?
No one survived. We actually were sailing through bodies.
Finally, 10 days after leaving port, we got word of a distress signal via alarm phone. There was a small boat that wasn't too far from Libya in the international waters, and Louisa had then had to perform a search with this. In some ways, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. In a vast ocean, the boat is moving with the currents and the wind all the time, and if the boat is behind a bigger wave and you look out at that moment, you won't see it with the binoculars. It'll be hidden behind the wall of the wave, and it's a tiny rubber dinghy. But after more than 10 hours of searching, finally, in that thick darkness, it's just before dawn, we saw 2 tiny little lights from the backs of mobile phones bobbing up and down in the waves, almost right next to the Ocean Viking. And we pointed the ship's spotlight in that direction, and it revealed this small rubber boat, 6 meters long, with 114 people on board, including 2 babies. They sent out 2 smaller rescue boats from the Ocean Viking to go and do the rescues. Rescues are very dangerous. If somebody gets too excited, or even if someone rushes to one side of the boat when they see help coming or to get life jackets, the boat could tip over and capsize, and then you have a situation where you're trying to save hundreds of people from drowning.
My name is Mimi. Okay, I am your friend. This is very dangerous.
So it's a very well coordinated and well planned process from approach onwards, and all of the rescuers are exceptionally well trained.
I need you to listen to what I say.
One of the rescue team described it as a theatre piece because the rescue team has to direct and calm a very stressed and anxious group of strangers.
Life jacket distribution. Life jacket distribution.
Sometimes even though they don't speak the same language. So they have a strategy and a plan for each step of the rescue. They use 2 rescue boats to balance out the attention and focus, which helps to also create an environment of order and structure. And once they have established this, they start to bring people onto the rescue boats and then take them back to the mothership. As we rowed back to the Ocean Viking, people were clearly completely shell-shocked and exhausted. And there's still this clear sense of fear and uncertainty of who we were and where we were taking them. Massimo is a deck leader on board the Ocean Viking. He worked from when he was a teenager on a merchant marine ship. But those are those massive cargo ships that are stacked with containers of products that are being shipped around the world. And he described to me the experience of when people come on board for the first time after being rescued.
I am one of this person, help the people to climb from this ladder from our rib to our mothership, to the Ocean Viking. So from this moment, they are really in a safe place. When they know this, it's like, okay, I'm arrived. Sometimes they just collapse in front of you. Because the stress is so high, they have, it's so high, maybe this collapse during for 5 minutes, nothing more, you know? But really, when they recognize they are in a safe place, sometimes they lose the energy in 1 minute. But when you see this, especially this really big man full of power, when they know they reach one safe place, sometimes they become a child full of gratitude because they come back at home or they feel home. And it's really touching me every time.
So as soon as the survivors are boarded the mothership, they're welcomed immediately by the IFRC care team, and they're given warm, dry clothes and a care pack and a big furry blanket. The team also includes 2 doctors, 2 midwives, and a post-rescue facilitator whose name is Abd al-Mohammed. He actually did this journey on a small boat from Libya to Italy years ago, so he really understands what this experience is like, being lost at sea. And he helped settle the survivors and explain where they are and what's happening.
I think the only sentence they want to hear, all of them, you are safe. You are safe means you are not going back to Libya. This is what I tell them literally. We are not going to Libya, and this means you are safe. Yes, for them is moment important. So I choose my words very well, and I tell them this with respect and dignity. And I think it is something they feel it and they believe me.
We felt like we were being reborn at that moment when we saw the ship coming. We were sure that we're all going to be dead. When we saw the ship coming up, that was the moment we all felt like we were being reborn. We are alive.
This is Hailum. He's 20 years old with a kind face and a gentle disposition. He escaped from the conflict in the Tigray region of Ethiopia when it flared up again. and he fled to a refugee camp in Sudan.
The war began suddenly last year because of the political crisis in Tigray. We had to run to save our lives because of the airstrikes and the tanks. We fled to a refugee camp in Sudan, but when we left the camp in Sudan to get jobs, we got kidnapped by people smugglers and brought to Libya.
After the smugglers released them when they paid the ransom, they didn't gain their freedom, but actually they were almost immediately arrested and put in prison, where, according to Hailum, they went through a brutal and terrifying ordeal. They were robbed, they were beaten, they were tortured, and some people were even killed in front of them. We can't independently confirm the specific details of Hailum's story, but it's actually a very common story of what it's like in Libya for migrants that's told by many survivors on board all of the rescued boats in the Mediterranean.
The smugglers in Libya know that Ethiopians will pay ransom money, so when they see us like we are just forest animals that come to a city. We were hunted like guinea fowl. Our photos and story were posted on social media, and people helped us to get money to be released. When we were in prison, we met a girl who was pregnant. After we all managed to pay and were released, there wasn't anyone to look after and watch over her. She was alone. So my friends and I welcomed her to stay with us. The baby was born by C-section, and it was one of the worst moments in my life. They didn't give her any piece of cloth to cover herself and the baby. They were holding their nose like she smelled bad. We all cried. It's a miracle the baby survived. There were no diapers and nothing to eat. She was bleeding and there was no doctor. She almost died in our hands. We knew there'd be very bad weather, but we decided to go anyway because with a newborn baby and a mother who's just given birth, we couldn't run and escape if they tried to shoot us. So we decided to go to the sea. I knew, even though it's a difficult journey, dying at sea is better than living in Libya. When this little boy, born in a prison, grows up one day, I'd like to tell him our story, and wonder if he'll ever believe me.
This little boy was 7 days old when he was rescued with his mother that day by the Ocean Viking, a tiny, brand new human being. There are 2 midwives and 2 doctors that take care of the survivors run by the IFRC care team. Dr. Marie Monus-Bertrand is one of the IFRC doctors. After people arrive on the boat, they're immediately checked by Dr. Marie and the medical team, and they treat any medical emergencies. A few of the crew, on a number of occasions, actually referred to the Ocean Viking as a floating ambulance. But as Dr. Marie explains, medical staff are also important on a rescue boat that picks up migrants and asylum seekers because many people arrive on the boat with pre-existing conditions from that very traumatic journey and often long journey they've been on. Just like the young mother who only a week ago had given birth by C-section.
While on the move, people will experience all sorts of changes and conditions and events. And even in the best conditions, there will be changes in language, changes in temperature, foods they will eat, and in the worst conditions, well, very hard living conditions and anything up to quite severe losses and trauma and injuries. And then when people arrive to destination and they have to start building their life from scratch again, and at the same time coming to terms with anything that may have happened before during migration. So migration has a huge impact on health.
Over the next days after the rescue, people sat in small huddles and in pairs under blankets, talking and sharing and kind of staying close. It felt like after months and often for some people years and years of uncertainty, of fear, of trauma, being imprisoned, beaten, sometimes even raped, narrowly escaping death, I think many people finally took a little breath out and got to hug and comfort each other. After the rescue happens, we actually sit in a limbo, really. So for days and days, we wait for a European country to assign a port to allow the survivors to disembark. Physically, we're in between lands, but also there's this big emotional and psychological in-between for the survivors, where they're in between their old lives and this totally unknown life that's yet to come. And as the days passed and the people got out of the crisis mode after the rescue and started to relax a little bit, the crew started turning on music, people started to dance at different moments in little groups. The crew handed out some games and made handmade makeshift soccer balls. They constructed volleyball courts between the containers on the deck. There was even a movie night with a projector. It really brought home to me, actually, that the survivors are mostly barely adults, that many were teenagers, in fact, and they had been in a state of profound crisis, upheaval and trauma for at least a year. So this was kind of a chance to just be young, to connect with the childhood and adolescence that was so violently ripped away from them. The days passed and we continued to wait. And the confines of the ship and the close quarters are definitely not easy for the survivors because they're sleeping like right next to each other in containers on the deck of the ship, and they're eating ration packs every day. But the days of the waiting, that limbo, are also hard on the crew. Some of whom, like me, have never been on a ship before and really feeling the effects of this. But there are crew members that are well-experienced sailors and have gotten used to this kind of life at sea, and they brought their insight and experience. Massimo worked on massive cargo ships and spent months out at sea. He speaks about the difference between those ships and this work on the rescue boat.
Sometimes also you don't know what you have in the container, you know. Here you save souls, you save person on the sea, so it's totally different. You give another chance at one person, so you have this beautiful chance of your life to help someone, but really help someone, so really save the life. My grandfather, he was a refugee too. He was in a camp. He just was hosted by a family after the borderline close to Gorizia, my city, and he was hosted over there, and he met a beautiful girl. She was my grandmother. Yeah, everyone was escaped from one situation in the life. Everybody was in trouble, so we know what is escape from something dangerous. So you must escape today. You don't have time to wait. I joined this mission for this. I have one chance to help someone like my grandfather, for example. It's also about dignity. I am a sailor. I'm not a politician. I am just a simple sailor. How you can live person in the middle of the sea without nothing, in a small rubber boat? Someone must be here, and it's what I do. I'm happy.
After about 10 days of waiting, the tension had really built up, and there was a sense of anxiety and also a restlessness. So when it was announced that we had a port of safety, people were very emotional. They were cheering, laughing, hugging each other, some were in tears. I think it was such a relief for everyone to know for sure, 100%, that they would not be returning to Libya, and that there was this new future in front of them. But like we're going to hear from Adele now, while people were celebrating, actually the journey and their struggles are far from over.
Because a lot of them, they arrive with big dreams, and then with time, they shock because they was not ready, because they think everything is easy. So I tried tell them the reality, because no one will tell you the reality. You will pass from hand to hand, from center to center, promise and promise. So you have to prepare yourself for this.
A lot of the survivors had no idea what to expect. There's a lot of misconceptions about what Europe is, about what life in Europe is going to be like. And just like the other side, there's a lot of misconceptions in Europe about what Africa is. So many of the migrants don't know that there'll be the system that they'll be put into when they arrive in Europe, that they won't just be able to go anywhere they want and get jobs and to be able to start working immediately. They get put into a system. So people's freedom of movement is very limited, and there isn't much education about what that system is. So I think Abdel spends a lot of time trying to explain to the survivors what the next step of the journey is, so that people can be prepared and understand a bit more what is to come.
We talk about how is the reality, how the migrants and refugees live in Europe. Every country has its own law, so explain to you the law. You arrive to Italy, you cannot move from Italy. You cannot leave Italy. So Italy can decide to give you document or not. In both cases, you cannot leave Italy. You have to find job in Italy, but we don't have job in Italy. You have to find document in Italy, but not all they deserve the document. They are so confused about this. Until he arrived to Libya, he had the choice to move where he wants. When you arrive to a country in Europe, you cannot move more, because they put all your data in this, and you are connected in Europe. And I know a lot of people in the street. Every time they go to Germany, they send them back. They go there, they send them back, and they are in the street now. Some of them they suicide, and some of them crazy, and some. It is not easy. I look at them and I feel sorry. Believe me, I feel sorry for what they will face. I am happy that they escaped from Libya and they are alive, but I feel very sorry for them.
For Hailum, he didn't want to leave Ethiopia. The war came, and he had to run for his life. And he ended up in a refugee camp in Sudan. And he didn't even choose to leave Sudan. He was kidnapped by force and taken to Libya. And even in Libya, it was not that he was saying, I want to go to Europe. He had to escape Libya because he was being imprisoned and beaten, and that was his only way to save his life. So he got on a boat and he fled. He's not chosen this journey, but he's on it. And as Abdel described to me, it's like falling down a mountain. You can't stop on the way down to look at the view. Hailum has been pushed down this hill and will arrive now in Europe with a tiny bit of hope that things will get easier. But it's not guaranteed.
My dream was only to have a peaceful life. And then when I left my country, my dream was simply to have my family with me. And then I started to dream only to be alive. Now I only want to realize one dream that I have, only one, to have a peaceful life and to know that my family is alive. I don't ask for much.
As I myself was preparing to leave the ship, I again felt like I was leaving one realm for another. I actually came back full of hope. Knowing that there are these people that have devoted their lives to bringing humanity to the seas, that filled me with hope. They're saving lives and they're making things more humane out there. There's so many stories that I heard during our 6 weeks at sea, dramatic, heartwarming stories from rescues, of babies being born on the ship, or love stories of connection, of healing, of hope. These stories are of the humanity out there. Despite the fact that this is really far from land, from human life, it's a place of profound humanity. So I didn't leave feeling hopeless. Actually, I left feeling inspired about what our potential is as human beings and what we can bring to change things.
Alexia, thanks so much for sharing your story. I'm just very glad that you were able to take this journey and you could take us along with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. It's been a pleasure.